First of all, thank you so much for joining, and we're excited for this next level webinar where our CTO, Peter Novosel, will be discussing custom widgets, AI, and more. Thanks so much for hosting, and you can do a quick intro of yourself if you'd like, and then we can go through today's agenda.
Absolutely. I probably know a number of you, but for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Peter Novosel. I'm one of the co-founders and chief technology officer for SmartSuite. And we're going to take this opportunity today to dig into our dashboards feature. Dashboards is a view type that has widgets that you can configure to show data from SmartSuite and from other places. And we'll get a little bit more into that as we go through. One of the more recent adds to dashboards is the grid widget, and I want to show you how powerful that can be and some of the configuration options to really get all of the information you need in one screen. We're also going to touch on the custom widget type, and I've been able to use this widget for a few things that aren't accommodated for directly in the product. As I mentioned at the very beginning, it's a precursor to some functionality that we intend to add to the product this year. We're looking at building an extensions type feature where you can actually use some JavaScript code to add functionality to SmartSuite itself. In the interim, we can use our REST APIs to do some interesting things. So we'll dive into that and we'll get into more or less technical detail depending on what kind of questions and where people want the discussion to go. We'll also just take a look at using some of the other capabilities like buttons. I've got an example that combines our button field type with a dashboard with make.com actions, and we can do some very interesting things. We'll get into, again, more or less technical detail depending on the questions. Please do. I would like to make this as interactive as possible and get any questions that you might have answered. So please do load up the Q&A and we'll get to those as we go through. So what we've got here, we're logged into my instance of SmartSuite where I've got some sample data. We're going to take a look at how we can turn this data into some more interesting views using our dashboards. Dashboards, just to start at the beginning here, dashboards are a view type. So when you open your list of views, here at the bottom, I've got an option for Create Dashboard. While we're here, I wanted to point out a couple of things that we've recently enhanced. See these pluses? They've been added by public views and private views to allow you to just automatically create that new view either as public or private. It's a little bit of a shortcut and just a handy thing. So if I go down here to my private views, I can hit the plus and select dashboard, and it will default then to dashboard as the type, and I can add the view. So once you've added a dashboard to your view, you get this little display indicating that the first thing that you need to do here is to add a widget. So a dashboard, think of a dashboard just as a container. It contains these things we call widgets, and you can arrange those widgets in a variety of different ways. We'll jump over to a different view here just to show you completed one. This is a dashboard that we usually use in sales demos and things of that sort just to show the range of capabilities. We have a variety of different widget types that are available. From here, we're joining a meeting through a button click. We've got several different metrics widget types, and we'll look at the configuration of these briefly because these can be very powerful in rolling up and displaying some of the metrics data that you have. And then you've got charts and graphs, and there are two different ways to approach charts and graphs, and I want to make sure everyone understands the different options. We have native charts and graphs, and then you can also reference the view type chart, which again is another one of these view type options. So if you have pre-built charts already configured in your solutions, you can use those. And then you can do some other fun things. You can embed video content, you can embed grids, and we're going to dive into this because this is very powerful to give you a functional working dashboard where you're not necessarily just looking at information, you're actually interacting with that information, even able to edit and open records and all of that kind of good stuff. Over here, you see an example of an embed. And in this case, this embed is actually yet another view type. This is a form. So we've configured a form and then used that embed code and place that directly onto the dashboard. And this can be a really convenient thing to do when you have, or when you're trying to configure a solution where you're wanting to give people a simplified interface. Maybe they only need to interact with just a subset of data, or they have very specific task needs that are related to other things that they're seeing on the dashboard. You can allow them to submit that data right in line without leaving their current view. So that's just a bit of an overview. I'm going to go back to our other environment here, and let's take a look at adding widgets. So when I click that Add Widget button, I'm presented with our widget library. And the widgets are organized into categories. We've got metrics, charts, conferencing. We can reference design type systems like Figma and Envision. All of the Google document types can be embedded directly. So if you have a Google Doc or a spreadsheet that you wanted to share for a particular workspace, you can do that. We've got a few other utility widgets as well. Custom code, we're going to spend a little bit of time with here later in the session. Text block is essentially like an embedded Smart Doc, and we'll take a look at that. And you can also just embed a web page. This is a neat addition as well. This widget, the data schema, we added relatively recently, and it will actually draw out the relationships you've built between the different apps you have in your solutions. And that can be very powerful. We'll take a look at these one by one and just dig into how you configure them and how they look. Let's flip over to a dashboard. Okay, just to give you a little context, here we've got some, say I'm managing incidents that occur in my IT department. I've got just some sample data, and perhaps we want to visualize this in a dashboard. I've got one pre-configured that shows just some of the possibilities here. I mentioned these metrics widgets, and the display is a little different. I've got this active incidents, and it's showing this over time change in this statistic. And this one is not showing that information. So what's different? If we go in here and we configure the settings for this metrics widget, what it's actually letting you do is select an app from the solution. You can select the individual field that you want to perform some sort of an aggregate function on. And by aggregate, we're talking about counting. Like if I'm looking at unique record titles, I could count those. If you have a numeric field, you could roll that up. Like if you had a total number of sales, that sort of thing. And here's the difference, this date to compare. So what metrics widgets allow you to do is select a date type field, and you can compare the value that matches whatever conditions you set in some type of time frame. And just to get your head around this comparison time frame, you've got two options. You can do the last unit of time versus the one before it. So say last week versus the week before, or you can do what we call a rolling window, and you can specify the amount of time you want to take a look back and say, we want to look at the last 7 days and what the changes from the prior 7 days, using today as the starting point. So this is the bit that people sometimes don't fully grasp until you play with this a little bit, is that if I say that I want to take a look at last week, it's literally looking at last week, not starting at today. So that's very useful in certain circumstances for, say, comparing sales metrics and those types of things. Maybe you want to look at something on a rolling weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis, or even annual. But sometimes a rolling window is more convenient. So I just want to take a look at today or the last 7 days versus the prior. And this data will give me the difference between this calculation in that time period and whether it's gone up or down, and if so, by what percentage. Now, this other widget, this one, I just want to see a raw count of how many issues are or incidents are escalated right now. So when I go in here, you can see the first thing that's been done is setting a filter. So when you're taking a look at this data, in this case, a count of the incidents by name, I want to filter those and only get those that have a field that says they're escalated. So this yes, no field is set to yes, and the status is not closed. So basically this is open escalated incidents. And you can see here, there's no field selected in date to compare. Now, if I selected a date to compare, it's going to add in and evaluate the change over this period of time. But sometimes that's not what I need. So if you mouse over, you'll see that you get a little X. You can remove that and just get the raw number. And in this case, that's what we wanted. We just want to see the number that are escalated currently. And we're not really concerned with the change over time. This is just a point in time. So that is one metric type. We have, and here I'll go back to my widget selector. There's also a progress metric. What the progress metric will let you do is set a goal, where this is particularly useful for things like tracking a sales team's progress to a numeric dollar sum goal. You could set that goal if it's $50,000, select my field, roll up the total, and it will show that comparison line. So that's handy in different ways. Both of those are options for you. Now let's go back out of here. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the grid widget, because this really gives you a lot of power and capability. Let's go to a blank dashboard, and we're going to just search. Oh, the search option is available here too, and you can find what you're looking for very quickly that way. In this case, I want a grid view, and it gives you some default selections. In this case, it's always going to be grid view type. In the future, we're going to be adding additional view types as well that can be embedded. When they're available, they'll show up in this list as well. One thing that I wanted to point out here is that you have a solution selector. So unlike when we were taking a look at, let's save that real quickly. When we were taking a look at our other, I want my incidents dashboard. When we were configuring the metric widget, we're just selecting the app. And this is something that we're looking at eventually enhancing as well. It will also allow you to select the solution, but for now, you have to select apps from within the solution that I'm in. The really powerful thing about Grid is that right out of the gate, we made it possible to select a different solution. So if I wanted to go through here and in my incident management solution, what I really wanted to do is take a look at the responses to those incidents. I'm in my custom dashboard solution right now, but I can pull that data, presuming that you have access to it. Access controls do still apply here, but I can select the solution and then select the app, and here we have that data. Then you've got some configuration options. Do I want to allow inline edit? And you can see as I toggle it, I'm getting a live preview. It's showing me what that capability is, whether or not I want the reporting toolbar, or no, I've got this thing locked down to just the view that I need. Maybe I want to simplify things and turn all of this stuff off, whether or not users can actually open the record, and then limit the number of displayed results. This is really useful in that you can say, hey, I just maybe want the top 10. I'm just concerned with the top 10 open incidents, top 10 prospects, whatever it is. You can easily create that top 10 list right here. You can also adjust all of the fields to display and everything that you normally would in a grid view. I can configure spotlights. I can configure how the row size is displayed. You can configure filters. And then again, whether or not you're displaying the toolbar, you could lock those things in for your user. You can name the individual widget. You can, let's say that I don't want to display that. I want to display type and status. Okay, I save my changes and there it is. And then you can resize this based on what that content is to give it the appropriate amount of space on your dashboard. It can also be moved around, and then I can add widgets to the side of it, like I've done in our incident dashboard, where I'm combining a variety of different types. Let's briefly touch on chart, because again, chart is pretty powerful. It allows you to, in this case, this chart widget is referencing a chart report. So in the event that you've already configured some charts in your solution, you can just easily add them to your dashboard. But if let's go back over to our new, I can add a chart widget. And when I do that, it's drawing it automatically, selecting some things from my targeted app. But again, you can see that solution is selectable. So this again gives you capability to reach out across solutions to pull information into a consolidated dashboard. And that can, again, be just really handy if you need a management overview. Maybe you're managing multiple departments or regions. You can reach into those different solutions and their data, pull the information back here, and display it all in a unified dashboard. You've got all the capabilities that you would need then to filter that data. You can add groupings, you can add chart totals, you can add benchmark lines. We're intending to continue to enhance our chart interface as well. I know that a number of people are asking for configuration options for axes and additional control over the colors and that sort of thing. All of that's coming. It's on the roadmap, and you will definitely see some enhancement to these widgets. But for now, yep, you can definitely use this selector to change what you're taking a look at and consolidate into a single dashboard. You can have multiple of these widgets on the page as well. One other thing, just functionally, that I wanted to make sure I touched on is this header bar has a bunch of options. And I don't know that many people notice these, but in addition to just the standard 3-dot menu with all of these options, you've also got these other two. Got the option to go full screen, and that's particularly handy with grid. You can see here, I've got a number of fields on there. When I expand it, I can see the entire grid, interact with that. And when I'm done, I can just hit the X. I can also minimize. And here's something to think about when you're constructing your dashboard. Sometimes you have to keep in mind the user experience. If you're loading a very large amount of data and it's pulling in reports and graphs with thousands of records and calculating metrics, that calculation can take a little bit of time. So you may see some spinners. If you have information that's a little heavier, or you just have a very large number of these widgets, you might consider having some of them minimized by default. And you can actually toggle that here with this option, so that when this dashboard's loaded, it's going to start out in this minimized state, and I've got to click it to expand. So that's just another configuration option to keep in mind as you're constructing things, especially as you start to load up a lot of data on a single dashboard and just need to consolidate and maximize your space. One last thing here in just the tips and tricks department. Let's say it would be convenient for me. Maybe I'm managing a bunch of different applications and their data. I want users to have the option just to click a button and say, hey, I want this to be my dashboard. Let's add an app, and I'm going to call this app dashboard. And I don't really care about what data is in here. What I really want to do is I want to create, let's create a new public view dashboard. And again, we can add, let's say we're just going to add a grid widget. And we can select, okay, custom dashboards is fine. Let's select our incidents again, just so that we've got something to display. Here's a trick. When you load a solution, the app at the very left of this list and its very first view is displayed first. So if what I want is to show this dashboard when anyone loads my custom dashboard solution for the first time and they haven't been playing around in there before, put this dashboard first, and that will be their default view. You can even remove, now that I've got two views, you always have to have at least one view. But now that I have two, it'll actually allow me to delete the grid view. So now what you effectively have is a button at the application level that displays your dashboard. So just another little configuration trick that can be convenient and handy to give you quick access to that dashboard and its content. All right, another brief pause. Do we have any other questions before we move into some other interesting stuff?
Yes, we do have a question about guest access and how that works with dashboards.
Okay. Guests have a limited view into the data. So guests could view a dashboard, but their permissions will restrict the data that's displayed. So a guest has to be assigned content to see it when they access your solution. So you can construct a dashboard that will display content to them, but you have to be thoughtful about what they have visibility to. And assigning them content involves just mentioning that guest in an assigned to field. I did want to just very briefly, we talked about these custom types, and this is a segue into looking at this custom code widget. But text block, I wanted to point out, text block is essentially an embedded smart doc. And it wasn't always that way. It started out just being text. So I wanted to point out that it is actually a smart doc now. So you can do tables, you can do all the stuff that you would normally do in a smart doc field right within this widget. So just keep that in mind as you're building. If you need some static content, that's a handy way to add it without having to go and write your own HTML, which is also possible. So again, one of the things that kind of motivated this whole discussion was taking a look at some of the things that we've built for customers and just experiments to see what's possible. And I wanted to show you a couple different widgets where we're embedding things in that custom type that are pulling data either from SmartSuite or from some external source. And I'll give you some tips on how to configure them. And we might even use a little ChatGPT here to generate some stuff and see how that goes. But to get us started, here's a simple example. This is a custom type widget. And what it's doing is it's embedding a little HTML and JavaScript that goes and constructs a chart using the Google Charts API. And if we open this guy up, you'll see instead of just a standard embed, we've got a little bit more content in there. And for those of you who are more technically inclined, I can show you what that looks like. And in this case, you can see this is an HTML document. It's got a little bit of embedded JavaScript, and it's statically defining the data in this case, but it's actually using the Google API to specify that, hey, I want to go draw this chart. Here are the options. And then when it's loaded, when this div is loaded, I want to display that content. And literally all that you do is you can cut and paste that content into this space. And what's interesting is it updates as you type. So every time you type a character, it's updating the preview, and you can see what that content looks like. Now, this is a pretty basic one where we're just sending the static array of values to that API, but you can see that just with a little tiny bit of code, it's possible to display some things that look like they might have come from SmartSuite, but aren't native to SmartSuite. Again, this is an area where when we have an extensions capability, you'll be able to create a widget that uses a SmartSuite JavaScript SDK to do some things and interact more with the system. But in this case, we're just interacting with that external API. Now, it's also possible to interact directly with SmartSuite and get data from SmartSuite's endpoints. And here's where we're going to get a little bit more technical, because it is possible to go and do things that call data. Here, I'll show you this de-duplicator. One of the things that I've been playing around with is just figuring out approaches to data duplication. It's one of the most frequently liked product additions on the roadmap. And I was just playing around with JavaScript to see what could be done. In this case, I'm not requiring that these titles be unique. And I was able to put together a little widget that actually is using the same technique. I'm using HTML and JavaScript to interact with SmartSuite's REST API. Now, again, a little bit more on the technical side. The interesting thing about calling REST endpoints using JavaScript in a widget is you already have an authenticated SmartSuite cookie, which means that call will be authorized as you if it's formed properly and will return the data that you have access to. So here, when I open this list, it's actually going and getting from Peter's workspace, it's going and getting a list of all of the active solutions. And once I select those, let's see, we are in custom dashboards. Here's custom dashboards. It's going to give me a list of all of my applications. I'm going to select dedupe. And here's our list of fields. And I'm going to say that I want to identify records that are identical based on the value they have in the title. So I've done that, and I can see that these, let's go check our work. Yep, those records have identical titles. But the way that I set this up, it does have the downside of not having this be a real kind of embedded widget, is that I'm not keeping state and it's resetting when I move away from it. But here, maybe I also want to evaluate the number. Now it's saying that I've got two groupings that are identical because I'm also requiring that the number be duplicated. I'm going to hit my dedupe button. And here we've got the first grouping. And in this case, the formatting's not very nice. This is just a proof of concept, but I'm showing that I've got two sets of duplicates to merge. I'm going to pick the one that I want to keep and delete the other one. I'm going to say OK. Tells me that it was deleted successfully. And then now I've got one set to dedupe. I'll pick the one I want to keep. Again, it's going to confirm. And if we go back, we're going to see we end up with two records. So this is the type of thing that we want to, again, long-term enable through extensions. We're also intending to add a scripting type to automation actions so that you could do this type of thing in the context of an automation using that trigger information to go perform some additional or more complex operations. Again, this requires you to know, at this point, to do this type of thing requires a little bit more sort of advanced knowledge. It's not real sophisticated, but knowing how to navigate a little bit of JavaScript to go call those APIs. Questions just high level here before I get into just a couple of other scenarios. Emma, do we have any other questions?
It looks like people are really interested in the AI portion of this.
In terms of AI, now we don't have anything directly embedded into dashboards themselves, but we do have a few concepts that John has shown in a couple of different webinars where we've got the capability right now for doing AI right within a smart doc field. That is almost ready for product launch. We're just tidying up a couple of things to allow you to use your own ChatGPT tokens and those types of things. It's in the final rounds of testing, and this is going to be available soon. But one of the things that might apply more to dashboards is this assistant function that right now takes what you type and it tries to generate a report that shows you the information that you're interested in. What we eventually would like to get to is having a dashboard generator that uses a similar thing where you can say, oh, I'm a sales manager. I would like to analyze my quarterly data. Please configure a dashboard and have it go do its thing. What I can show you today isn't that quite yet, but again, with our custom widget, there are ways that if you're creative, you can tell ChatGPT to generate some things that do interesting stuff in that custom widget on your dashboard. At the risk of this kind of going sideways, because you never know how ChatGPT is exactly going to interact, let's try a little experiment and see. We'll create a new custom widget. Let's see if we can get ChatGPT to generate a widget that shows the top YouTube videos in a grid. And I was able to do this successfully earlier. Let's see if I can replicate that little bit of success. But the real key is, and if I can move my toolbar out of the way here, the real key to getting it to do the right thing is in how you form the question or in what information you provide to AI so that it knows how and what to generate. In this case, let's say create HTML and JavaScript that uses the YouTube API to display the top 10 videos in the grid. Let's see what AI comes back with. And what do you know? It's actually generating HTML as well as JavaScript that is purporting to do that. Now let's see if it works. When ChatGPT generates code, you get a copy code option up at the top of the block. And we can go back over to our dashboard. And what you're going to notice is it doesn't really do anything. That's because, and they put as the caveat in here, you have to fill in your API key. And I was thinking about this ahead of time, so hopefully I've got a key that'll work here. Go back over. And we're going to, as we do the extensions thing, this interface will be more conducive to actually editing stuff. This was built with the intention of just pasting in some embed code for embeddable HTML sites. So obviously it's not ideal for what we're doing here, but hey, what do you know? ChatGPT just generated everything that we need to create that widget in that much time. Pretty cool. And we can just plop that right on our dashboard, make it as big as we want. And there you go. You've got embedded YouTube videos in your custom widget. Pretty neat. Yeah, I've managed to use this for a variety of different things. Obviously, this is kind of trivial and just fun, but one thing that I was able to do with this is do things like force geocoding. Here, let's delete a couple of these. I'll put in an address that I know off the top of my head. It's an old address of mine. And by default, when you put an address into the address field itself, it's just entering the text. It's not geocoding it. So that's problematic in that it's just sitting there in the first address field, and I don't have latitude and longitude. So if I wanted to go map this, see that I don't have my little map indicator. But by using a little bit of JavaScript, I'm going to go, I forgot to flip my toggle probably. Yep. I added a toggle here to tell it when it's already been geocoded so it doesn't pick it up again. I come back over here and say, hey, go geotag this. All I'm doing is using some JavaScript to go hit the Google Maps API, get those latitude and longitude values and put them back into that address field. And now you'll see that, hey, what do you know? I've got my little icon. If I open up this record, there it is, geocoded. And it also filled in the Google Maps version of the address into the appropriate fields. And doing something like that, it's a moderate level of technical ability to do this. It's just scrolling through to give you an idea of how much code is involved. We're not going to deep dive into all of the ins and outs of doing this, but again, you can use ChatGPT to make a lot of this easier. You know, I have to tell it what an address field is and how to make that API call. That's something that ChatGPT is really good at. And let's see, we'll tempt fate, and I'm going to try to do this on the fly. One thing to keep in mind is that if you're going to try out some of this JavaScript technique, you have API docs available right here. So just open up your solution, click on the solution API. One caveat here is that when I do that, it's generating this information dynamically. So if I go back and I add another field, it's not going to automatically add it to this. I'm going to have to open it again because it, again, is generated when it's open based on the current fields and so forth. But if you click on the app that you're interested in interacting with, and let's say I want to list the records, it gives you information as well as a code sample about how to interact with this thing. And it also gives you a sample of what the response is going to look like from the API. I was thinking, it's interesting. I wonder if I fed all of this stuff to ChatGPT, could I get it to generate something that would do that for me? So let's give it a go. Let's see, let's say generate HTML and JavaScript that calls this Widgets API and displays. Let's see, what do we want to display? Let's display the total value returned. And here's the thing, when you're interacting with ChatGPT, you can give it instructions and you can give it examples. Here's the API. Sample data. And I'll go back to this output and I want to get this little bit of JSON. And let's see what ChatGPT thinks about that. And it's generating. Pretty short. Now let's see what this does. Go back over to, let's go to our test. Oh, I'm giving it away. I was trying this out earlier. Let's see if we can replicate it. Look at that. From what I asked it to do, it's getting the fact that we have one record, and it's returning that count value. So this, and I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the metrics widget, right at the moment, it has that limitation that you're just stuck within this one solution. With this API call, I could reference any solution that I wanted. All I have to do is pass it the right IDs, and it's going to bring back that value. So if you really needed that metric, you could use this technique just like we did. ChatGPT will write you everything that you need to make that happen. And here you can see it just created me a function called fetch data. It's got all of that information that was right out of the API docs. It knows what to expect from it because I told it what it looks like. So it can actually go get that information, the total value, and put it into the HTML output and show the value. Pretty cool, huh? All without, I didn't need to write any JavaScript myself. ChatGPT did it for me, and probably quite a bit more efficiently than I would have done by hand. So just another technique, again, to use those APIs creatively to pull back some data. Just real briefly, I know we're getting close to the end of time, and I want to make sure that I've still got time for any questions. I wanted to show you one last thing. I don't know if any of you are looking at or using SmartSuite for GRC or kind of risk and compliance related things, but one of the things that happens a lot in that space is you need to create questionnaires. And to create a quote unquote questionnaire, a form in SmartSuite, you have to have an app that contains all the fields. And generally you want that to look something like this, where you're asking questions and you're able to answer it and maybe provide some commentary. If all of your information that would be used to create those questions is stored in a way that isn't directly aligned with what you want to have in the questionnaire, now you're creating that thing by hand. In this case, I have a bunch of assessments. They're linked to this big, ugly looking authoritative source called NIST 839. I've got 21 controls that I need to go question people about. Now I'm going to go have to create 42 fields to capture that information on my form. Not a lot of fun. So using these same techniques, I put together a little workaround where we have an assessment generator that lets me pick which of these things I would like to do that for. It figures out what those controls are and what questions need to be on in that app. And here's the cool bit, is actually generating it. I'm tracking the progress. Okay, we're complete now. And if I open up, actually, one of the bits here is that it doesn't show until I refresh. I want to show those individual fields. It goes and it creates the individual fields, again, using the API. This is, by the way, to point out just another kind of unrelated feature. We've added an option in help text that allows you to show, instead of help as a tooltip, you can show it below the field name. So if you have a situation where it's more like this, where you want to ask questions in your application, you can use the help text to basically give you that capability, where maybe you're showing the field name as an ID, but the help text is actually a question. And then I could say yes, no, and maybe add some comments to it. Just another technique and kind of work around using that help capability. So that is about it for things that I have to demo. I do have one more if anyone's interested that just has to do with using make.com. I don't know if anyone, show of hands, if anyone wants to see how you can use make.com and buttons. Where are we at with questions and that sort of thing, Emma?
Sure. So we do have a couple questions about the sample code that you used. Some people are interested in getting that. Would that be possible?
Sure. You know what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of community posts where I put some of these samples in there with a little bit of description on how they work, how to generate it, maybe more about these ChatGPT tips and tricks that I've learned in just getting things to be formatted properly. So yeah, I'd be happy to share the majority of this code, as long as no one is going to send me back to coding school, because not all of it's pretty. So don't code review me, but I'm happy to share.
And then someone is curious about the timeline for when we can call a script from automations.
It's going to be later this year. I don't know exactly when, simply because we've got a number of things that are in the pipeline here for the immediate short term. We're working on dependencies and Gantt charts. We've just added, also on the technical side, we've added programmatic webhooks that will send you webhook notifications based on record events. So create, update, and delete events. That's available now. It's labeled beta, but it's generally available. And we're also adding webhook triggers and actions. So after we get done with triggers and actions, or the webhook triggers and actions, we'll add the scripting action type to automations. And then we'll use that same SDK to go on and create what I was talking about with some sort of an extensions model where you can actually do cool things within the SmartSuite UI based on a plugin that you register. So more details as we get further into the quarter here, but this year for sure, not exactly sure when, probably sometime early fourth quarter, but don't quote me on it just yet.
So it looks like several people are interested in seeing the make.com demo.
Sure. Okay. It's really a two-part thing. Part one involves our button field. So if you weren't familiar with this, we've added a button field type. And what the button field type allows you to do, if I can work around my Zoom toolbar again, is actually create a formula that allows you to specify the format for the URL. Now, the interesting thing, yeah, you can point this at a static URL, not super useful, or you can reference other fields in the app, more useful. Even better, what I can do is put in a make webhook endpoint. And here I'm appending an ID and including the record ID. Now, that gives you access to a lot of really interesting stuff through make. And let me show you the make side. In this case, what I've done here, and this came from a customer requirement on one of our projects where they wanted to interact and manage projects in SmartSuite, but they also had to have files associated with those projects, and they were required to store them in SharePoint and nowhere but SharePoint, just some sort of a company policy. So to accommodate that, what we did is created a webhook endpoint. So this is a custom webhook, and you get this URL when you create one. And you can see back here, that's this URL, which means that whenever I call this thing, I'm going to send to make and include this ID parameter, which happens to include my record ID. What that lets you do is get those bits of information. And here I just used my own personal Microsoft account to go and actually do some interesting things with file upload. The technique that I'm using here, let's see if this will actually work for me, is to use a make webhook response to show me some custom HTML. And this custom HTML allows me to go through here and see if I can find some sort of a document, maybe in downloads or something. Test invoice, how about that? Upload it to SharePoint. And let's see, which one did I click on here? May have to go back to our all incidents display. Actually, let's create a new grid view and just add file ID and file link. Looks like we're still waiting. Or maybe I don't have the right things. I may not have the right things running on make at this point, because actually I think this one may not be the right one because it's not showing my upload. See if I can find it real quickly. And otherwise, I'll just come back and I'll document it more in online. Yeah, I don't know that I can find it right now. But essentially what it's doing is it's putting that file out on SharePoint, and then it's linking. All it does is it inserts a link back here to the actual file so that you can see it. You can open, oh, there it is. Okay, it did work. And when I click that, this file was just opened from SharePoint. So there you go. You've got a file uploader that's completely external to SmartSuite that's using Make to display a custom bit of HTML that allows us to upload the file and then get those results and attach them back into SmartSuite. So lots of uses for this button type. Just think about, and generally you're passing a record ID, because in this scenario, should show that at least, is that you're getting that file ID off of the URL. And any of the parameters that are passed to that webhook will come along with it. So I could actually chain a bunch of different things onto this URL if I needed more context, or I can just come back and I can look up this record and get all of the context. I could get any of the data from this record, or do other queries as necessary. And there's the actual SharePoint unique file ID. So the possibilities are really endless with this type of thing, along with Make. It gives you a ton of possibilities. I will definitely create at least a couple of community posts and probably a blog or two on just how to do this with webhooks, because it's so powerful. And here's the webhook response. So if I create a custom webhook and I add a new one, no restrictions, say okay, I can add this webhook response. And what it allows you to do is send back a body. And that body could contain HTML and script that does things like draw that little file uploader that I showed you. And yeah, you can carry on from there and use values that come out of that. It's pretty cool stuff. So we definitely don't have time to get into all of it here today, but I am happy to share more details in the community. Okay, I know we're a little over time, but I'm happy to take additional questions if anyone wants to hang around. You can absolutely do any kind of calculation that you could just in JavaScript. In some of the code, like in that de-duplicator, there's quite a bit of logic. I don't know that I've got the dedupe code in here, but it's actually doing quite a bit of complex sorting and that sort of thing to figure out the uniqueness. You do the same thing with a set of numbers. You can consolidate things. You do roll-ups. You could conceivably embed something that would do in effect either a lookup table or like a pivot table. Again, possibilities are endless. It's just a matter of doing the right things in the JavaScript to get the output that you want. One other thing that I'll mention here, once you've started one of these ChatGPT sessions, the neat thing is you can keep going and you can tell it apply a design style to the output and send I meant to say material style, but maybe it'll understand what I'm saying. You can actually tell it to keep modifying that same code that it generated. So if it didn't do something that you liked and maybe you weren't happy with the output of, was it over in our test? Yeah, it's ugly. You could tell it to clean it up. Hey, I want this centered, give me a background, that sort of thing. And it will go and modify that code. And it generally is, it doesn't get you all the way there, but it often gets you pretty close. Let's see what the updated. Yeah. And now it's stuck for some reason because it decided to display a loader and it's not. Many times as you work through these things, you'll get code that gets stuck a little bit and you can actually tell it, hey, loading, fix the number. And oftentimes it'll say, hey, yeah, actually, we need to do this in a different order, or I'm going to update the code to fix that particular issue. And a lot of times it works. Again, not foolproof, but definitely enough to get you started in many instances.
All right. It looks like there's not any more questions. Thank you so much, Peter. Everyone, it seemed to really enjoy it. And even some of
Absolutely.
our partners were pretty impressed and want to follow up with you after.
Keep the questions coming and let's start some conversations in the community and we'll carry on there and I'll share some of the code samples.
Sure. Thank you so
Thanks
much,
everyone
Peter.
for attending and talk to you again soon.